योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहु पुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिम्। हरिः ओम्। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दुग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। So the shlokas that we are studying here, the verses that we are studying in the Bhagavad Gita, are basically about the idea of incarnation as it is understood in the yogic traditions. And this idea is very important because it gives a very specific place to some of the greatest figures that have inspired the practice, the living, the philosophical and psychological analysis of the inner reality, of the inner world, of consciousness itself. May it be the Buddha of the Buddhistic traditions, or may it be Rama and Krishna. Lord Rama, through his ideal lifestyle, has influenced tremendously over the last 2,000 years a vast area, not only of the Indian subcontinent, but most of Southeast Asia. As far as the Philippines, people have been studying Lord Rama's life, has become the subject of some of the greatest epics, the national epic of Burma, the national epic of Thailand, Cambodia, the national epic of Indonesia. They are all their vernacular versions of Ramayana, the story of the Rama. And same, Krishna as Yogeshwara, through his teachings, specifically through his teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, has a very great importance. And the Buddha, through his meditative teachings, through his teachings on meditation, on dhyana, which became Chan in China and then Zen in Japan. These great personalities have moved and influenced generations and generations of great mystics and their disciples that came into existence in this part of the world. So what is their place? What is their place in the worldview, in the yogic worldview? Why they are venerated, why they are worshipped, why their stories, their ideal lifestyles are sung in all these different cultures. Why is it so? This is what these shlokas are about. The 6th, the 7th, the 8th, these few shlokas, up to the 9th, I must say, starting from the 5th up to the 9th shloka, Shri Krishna talks about this, and of course he will again come back to this idea in the 10th chapter. The 10th chapter is in a way just a further explanation, more detailed explanation of these 5-6 shlokas. So, even though we had pronounced the 6th shloka in our previous class, let us do it again, as we are. There are some few friends here also who were not present, so we'll just pronounce the Sanskrit shloka once more and then understand its meaning, what Krishna is talking about. Ajopi, 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 san, avyayatma, bhutanam, Ishwaropi, san, prakritim, swamadhisthaya, sambhavami, atmamayaya, ajopi sannavyayatma, bhutanamishwaropi san, prakritim swamadhisthaya, sambhavamyatmamayaya. The idea of incarnation is deeply related to the idea of God. That is certainly there. So when we discuss the idea of incarnation, we need to know that yoga, as understood by Sage Patanjali, as presented by Sage Patanjali, and the tradition in which it arose, there was naturally also a place for atheistic ideas. And therefore, even though Patanjali's understanding of yoga is a theistic philosophy, he mentions the idea of Ishvara very prominently and as a very surrender to the divine as one of the 5 niyamas, the last one. He says that the goal of yoga can easily be achieved by surrendering Ishvara Pranidhanadva, by surrendering to that omnipresent divinity. Yet it is only after he has discussed some of the most important ideas related to yoga, abhyasa and vairagya, constant practice and detachment, and he discusses the various stages of samadhi, deep meditation. Only after basically having completed the discussion of the core principles of yoga, he comes to the idea of God, and that too Ishvara pranidhanad va, either make tremendous effort, or the goal of yoga is closest for those who have a tremendous inner drive to achieve that goal, tivra samveganam asannaha. And then he says, or Ishvara pranidhanadva, or. So that idea of or that he says is that va in his teachings is usually understood as the sign that he wishes to accommodate a tradition in which yoga was equally prominent and yet the idea of God was completely absent. And that would be specifically the Nirishwara Sankhya tradition, the atheistic Sankhya tradition, in which the idea of God was considered completely meaningless. Because nature itself produces everything that is there. And this was a very influential thought. We find its influence on Jainism, on Buddhism, and that is why, even as we understand Buddhism today, the approach is quite agnostic. There are no clear answers, and the Buddha did not concern himself actually with these questions. But when the idea of God comes, there are a few things that have to be kept in mind, because we are discussing incarnation, the idea of incarnation. In the Advaitic, in the non-dualistic understanding of the yoga philosophy and of Vedanta philosophy, if I would try to explain God in relationship to us human beings, we would be just trying to put the idea into perspective that we as individual human beings would be what a spark is in relation to fire, which means a tiny little part, a limited part of it. Or a reflection in a mirror of the sun, sun's reflection in the mirror, its relationship to the sun itself. You have 1,000 mirrors and you have one sun, and that one sun is being reflected in each and every mirror, producing these thousands of reflections, yet its oneness, its ultimate oneness, the moment it sets, all suns in all those mirrors, all those individual suns, they are completely inseparable from it. And the idea of yoga, the idea of Vedanta is that this individual mind, antahkarana as it is called, the internal organs, the mind, the intellect, the limited sense of I and memory, these four faculties, known as chitta, the mind content, the known aspect of the mind, reflect that omnipresent consciousness, and it is that reflection within this individual mind which is perceived as the individual self, which ultimately has no existence apart from that omnipresent light of consciousness. Like light is omnipresent. We think the sun is up there and the mirror is down here. But why does the sun get reflected into that mirror? Because through its rays, it is present all around the mirror. Those photons of light are present all around the mirror. But the idea is that this individual consciousness is completely inseparable part of that omnipresent consciousness which is present everywhere. And to make the idea a little bit more clear, then usually this is what Patanjali also says in his third sutra, Tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. In the state of yoga, a seer is established in his essential nature. So the difference between God and an individual human being or individual consciousness is only the difference that is there between a crystal that is, for example, just to give an example, is placed on a red background, and because of that red background has assumed that reddish hue, reddish color, and has lost its transparency. The moment you put it on a green background, it seems a little bit like greenish. That coloring that it assumes as you place a crystal on different backgrounds. And the idea of God is just that crystal in its essential nature, without any coloring imposed upon it by any background. Which that crystal, even while being placed on a background, is actually that. It doesn't really become green by simply placing it on a green background. It doesn't become blue when we place it on a blue background. It is always transparent, colorless, always, in every moment. Yet, as it comes in contact with that background, it seems to assume that form. And that is what makes a crystal placed on a green background different from a crystal placed on a blue background. That is their individuality. But in reality, both are completely transparently clean. And it is that transparent, colorless, clean nature of the crystal which a yogi celebrates through the word God. When the word Ishvara is used, when the word Brahman is used, pure consciousness which is not tainted, which is not affected by thought content, by any external dividing content, but as it would be without any content at all. Because the moment you put water into a glass, it assumes the shape of that glass. If your glass is round, the form of that water will also become round. And allow it to get crystallized, which means allow it to become snow. How do you call it? Ice, yes. Allow it to become ice, and it is so solidly, it assumes the form of that vessel. Yet the moment you allow it to thaw, the form is no more there. That is exactly the same thing what, in the understanding of yoga and Vedanta, happens to consciousness as it gets reflected into this mirror of the mind. So when we speak of God, by meditating upon God, by surrendering upon God, a yogi is not actually meditating on someone else up there or something else up there, but on his own essential nature, on what he is actually in reality. The reflection in a mirror, just let us make a thought experiment. Psychologists do it so often. It helps us to make sense of ideas that are difficult to grasp. You have a mirror and you have this reflection of the sun. We know that reflection is warm. You can actually feel the warmth when it reflects the sun back on your face. The light, however, it is limited. But there is a little bit of warmth in that reflection. There is a little bit of light in that reflection. Now just think, if the sun would have been conscious and would have radiated consciousness along its warmth and light, and that little bit of consciousness would have also been present in the reflection of the sun, in the mirror, and that reflection would have been conscious of itself, and it would have started meditating that reflection in the mirror upon the sun. Is it meditating on something else? Or is it meditating on what that reflection actually is? So the idea of Ishvara, the idea of surrendering to that divine is not surrendering to something else, but the idea is to surrender oneself, as we understand ourselves now, limited through our ignorance, surrendering ourselves to that essential core. So when a yogi meditates upon God, he is actually meditating upon himself as he himself would become. And I'm just using the word would become. He actually is. Coming back to the idea of the crystal. If the crystal that is colored meditates upon itself in reality as being free from any coloring, it is actually meditating upon what it really is. So these, first of all, the antakarana, the four inner organs, and within them what yogis call the five fundamental causes of suffering, out of which the first one is ignorance, forgetfulness. We already talked a lot about forgetfulness in our previous classes and how it is required for birth actually to happen in the understanding of yoga and Vedanta. Avidya then, which leads to this individual limited understanding, selfish attachment, hatred and fear, all these things which are the factors which limit consciousness, which create a limitation on consciousness, as a yogi would be without these limitations. That is what he understands as Brahman, that is what he understands as Ishvara, which we translate into English as God. When he surrenders to that, when he submits, he is actually submitting to that. Therefore, the idea of duality, the idea that God is something separate from our essential core, when the Upanishads, for example, when they say Athayonyam devatam upaste, someone who worships a divinity that he perceives as being completely different from himself, nasa Veda, he will never become aware, anyo asau anyo ahamasmiti, thinking that that divine is different from what I am, nasa Veda. He will never be able to experience, to acquire it, to become it. But yatha pashurevam sadevanam, he will just remain an animal, a pashu, an ignorant animal of those various gods that are worshipped by humanity, by various races of humanity. So when we speak of the yogic or the Vedic method of worship, the first thing always is pratikopasana. Upasana means both. Upasana means worship and upasana means meditation. Upasana actually means to sit close. If I choose a representation of the divine, sit close to it, that is upasana, and try to feel its presence. That is upasana. I can do it physically. Initially it is required to do physically. After some time, when a person has developed that inner tendency, inner propensity, even that physical presence is not required. Upasana becomes a deep inner mental act. A person, the moment he becomes aware of that consciousness, it is upasana. It is going close to it. So therefore, upasana means both. Upasana, in English we have two words, worship and meditation. Here it is just one word. So yes, initially it is pratikopasana, using a pratika, using a symbol, an external symbol to train one's mind, using a symbol to focus one's mind. We use this. Why we use this? So that when we are doing our yoga classes, simply by looking at him during our classes, we become aware of the divine presence, of the omnipresence, which is everywhere in the room. But this, he just helps us to become aware of it. He just gives a direction. Because memory needs a trigger. And this is a trigger, that's all. It triggers that memory. if it has been already cultivated. That is pratikopasana. It is in initial stages as a person's capability of focusing and meditation develops. Then the further advanced techniques of meditation and worship are called ahangrahopasana. They are no more a symbol is used. All these symbols that we use, whether they are visual symbols in the form of statues, pictures, or abstract symbols such as Om, or sound symbols, when we use Om, the sound of Om itself as a symbol to focus our mind upon all these symbols. That is the first step. But then the second step are upasanas or meditative techniques or worships in which a person worships on entities which are not perceived as this. Because when we meditate on a symbol, it is perceived as this. I versus this. Ahangrahopasana are meditative techniques in which the object of meditation is perceived as I. Ahangraha. Graha means to perceive, aham means I, and upasana means meditation. Meditation on objects in which they are perceived as I. This is what I am, as inseparable from one's essential nature. If you analyze this technique in Patanjali's understanding of Savitarka Samadhi, in which first of all he speaks of meditating on gross objects, then on subtle inner objects, vitarka, vichara, then meditating on the peace, stillness that a person develops as a result of that. That is the third step. And then the fourth step, asmita, in which asmita anugata samprajnat samadhi, as he calls it, in which a person meditates on I amness. That would be what asmita can be translated into English very literally. I amness. That's a different analysis. I don't want to get into that. But that beautifully correlates with the Upanishadic understanding of ahangrahopasana. They are both speaking of the same thing. So, coming back to our discussion is that essentially in the understanding of yoga, God is not something different, but it is what we are. The moment we free, to give an example, we have a pot, and in that pot is empty space. Space is infinite. And yet the space within that pot is finite, but only till the pot exists. And the pot is temporary. The pot cannot exist forever. The pot was created and it will have to be destroyed. Before the pot was created, the space was there and it was infinite. And after the pot will be destroyed, space will remain there and it will be infinite. The finite nature of that space within the spot is a momentary thing. It never was and it never will be, yet it seems there to be very real for a few years, months, till the pot remains. But the path of yoga, what it helps the space within that pot to do is to become aware of its infinite nature by transcending the limitation that has been imposed by that pot on that infinite space. And the word ghata, now this does not work in English, but in Hindi, in Sanskrit, it works very easily, the idea of this example, because the same Sanskrit Hindi word for pot also means body. Ghata, the word ghata in Sanskrit, Hindi, also means this physical body. When, for example, the great mystic Kabir, 15th century, great mystic, amazing mystic, Muslims of India claim him to be Muslim, and Hindus of India claim him to be Hindu, and yet he transcended both these limited identities. His name obviously is an Arabic name, so he must have, it seems that he must have born into a Muslim family. Yet all his traditions, they identify themselves as Hindus. Kabir Panthis today, those who follow his teachings, they identify themselves as Hindus. So he, in his teachings, when he uses the word ghata, then he always refers to this body. So when we discuss the idea of incarnation, which is inseparable from the idea of God, because that omnipresent divinity, that awareness, as it descends onto this level of existence, the only difference that is there between an incarnated and between an ignorant being is just that an incarnated being like Krishna, like Rama, like Buddha, they have that perpetual awareness of that essential inner truth which exists within themselves, while an ignorant being lacks that awareness, that mindfulness, what Patanjali calls smriti, mindfulness, what the Buddha calls sati, and what they sometimes refer to as the rising of the sun of awareness, or the rising of the sun of mindfulness. When the sun of mindfulness arises in one's life, which Buddha calls it satipatthana, and Patanjali calls it smrityupasthana. Upasthana is also the word that we use for sunrise, suryopasthana, the sunrise, and smrityupasthana, the rise of mindfulness. So someone who is completely mindful, always aware, does not forget it, is perpetually aware of that. And it is in that perpetual awareness that Sri Krishna says, Ajopisan, even though I am in my essential nature completely unborn, and then avyayatma, my essential core, my Atman, myself, is imperishable, which means I transcend, in my essential nature, I transcend birth and death, both. Aja denies birth and avyayatma denies death. I transcend both. We all transcend both. Ajopisan avyayatma. Then, bhutanam ishwaropi san. Despite being the Lord of all beings. Now this is not, he's not referring, when Krishna speaks of himself, he is not referring to his limited being, but he is referring to the infinite core which is there within himself, of which he is aware. Like consciousness, individual consciousness is understood as the Lord of this body. Whatever consciousness decides, the body does, certainly to some extent. Then it also influences consciousness back through its needs. That also happens. There is like between the physical body and between consciousness embodied into this physical body, there is like a deep interaction. Consciousness influences the body, and the body also influences consciousness. The stronger it becomes, the greater its mastery becomes over the body. And that is the idea of yoga practices, that through following a very strict regime and through the asanas a person acquires mastery over his body through pranayama, over his breathing patterns, which then eventually affects the mind, the thought pattern. So through dhyana, through meditation, a person acquires mastery over his mind. So like consciousness is the master of this body, and the moment it leaves, the body remains of no use, but rather becomes a burden on society itself. The society has to get rid of that body, has to find a way to get rid of that body the moment consciousness leaves. So consciousness, like consciousness, is the limited consciousness is the owner, is the master of this body. Similarly, consciousness collectively, if we say collectively, putting all these individual consciousness together, that omnipresent consciousness is understood as the master of everything, as the Lord of everything. And that is what the word Ishvara stands for. So, the idea that Hinduism, which originated in the British era, that Hindus worship many gods or believe in many gods, this idea is completely baseless, because whenever the idea of Ishvara is discussed in any of the Indian philosophy, where it is accepted, either it is rejected or it is accepted. Out of 6 Vedic philosophies, 3 have rejected it, 3 have accepted it. So those who have accepted it, for them it is consciousness collectively, which can only be one. You cannot have 2, you cannot have 3, you cannot have many. So wherever the idea of Ishvara is there, it is one. Yes, you can have many forms, you can have many manifestations, you can have many names and forms, you can have many. But the idea of Ishvara is always one. And that is consciousness collectively. So even though in my essential nature, and he's not talking about only himself. When he's talking about himself, he's talking about everybody else. The difference, I must remind, that he's aware of it. Everybody else isn't. Through the path of yoga, a person can become aware. So of that universal or collective consciousness, which I would say the master of the macrocosmic reality. Like consciousness is the master, individual consciousness is the master of this microcosmic reality. Collectively, the same consciousness, universal consciousness, was understood as the master of everything. So when we speak of Ishvara, of the master of the universe, the master of everything, it is that what a yogi has in mind. Universal consciousness, collective consciousness collectively. Bhutanam Ishvaropi san. Even though in my essential nature I am the Lord of all beings. Bhuta means, the Sanskrit word bhuta means exactly beings, because from be it is beings, those which come into existence. Bhavantiti bhutani, those which get produced and which get destroyed, which constantly are born and die, which means the physical aspect, the material aspect of our being, which is produced, which has a finite beginning and which has a finite end. Both are inevitable truths for every individual that comes into existence. There can be no individual without this, without birth and death. And that is referred to as bhuta. But consciousness collectively is referred to as Ishvara. Ishvara simply means the supreme ruler. Ish means to rule, to master, and Ishvara means the supreme ruler. So even though I, in my essential nature, I am one with the supreme ruler, still What else? He says, Prakritim swamadhisthaya sambhavami. I take birth being the master of my Prakriti, being the master of my nature. Awareness, mindfulness gives us this mastery over one's nature. Isn't it strange? Because we have been comparing so much of this idea with the dream body. When we discussed reincarnation, we discussed how the dream body is produced. How interesting it is that the moment our dream becomes lucid, which means the moment we become aware in our dream that this is a dream, and we become aware that this is everything, I'm creating it, I'm seeing it, and I have created it. All the studies by psychologists, I have not explored it myself, but I have seen these studies. They seem to suggest that the moment a dream becomes lucid, a person completely gains control over his dream experience. He does not remain a slave of his dream experience as we usually are. The moment it becomes lucid, the moment we become aware, we gain mastery over our experience, what we are having in our dream, over our dream content. There have been actually interesting reports that people have met great leaders and actually interviewed them according to their desire in their dream while they were having the dream experience. And such things. So, Prakritim swamadhisthaya sambhavami, that I take birth, being the master. Adhisthaya does not really, how to translate it, you know. When I drive my car or when I drive my chariot, then it's not actually, I'm not pulling the car or pulling the chariot. The chariot is being pulled by the horses or by the engine in the case of the car. Yet, I'm the one who is doing the adhisthana, who decides where the car goes, where the horses lead the chariot. So the chariot here, the word adhisthaya is used in that sense. It is used, he's the adhisthata. Adhisthata means the one who decides where the chariot needs to go. He's called adhisthata. So I don't take birth as a slave of my nature, but I take birth as an adhisthata, as the one who decides my course of my destiny, of my birth. I take birth in that way. Prakritim swam. And this is not somebody else's nature. It is my very nature. It is my essential nature. But Prakritim swam adhisthaya, which let us see how he translated. I manifest myself through my own yoga maya. I will come back to this. Keeping my nature, Prakriti, under control. Yes, under control. Well, yes, sort of. Under control. This idea of Prakriti, this idea of cosmic nature, cosmic substance, cosmic matter, is a very essential concept. Sri Krishna uses two words here. Prakritim swamadhisthaya, he uses the word Prakriti, and Sambhavami Atma Mayaya. He also uses the word Maya. Both mean exactly the same thing. Yet, the idea of Prakriti is more, the word Prakriti is used more in Sankhya and Yoga, and the word Maya is used more in Vedanta. The moment we hear the word Maya, we think of illusion. But Maya is not illusion. Maya, if at all, it is the energy which makes the illusion take place. It's not illusion per se, it's not illusion itself. It is that energy, and that energy is not an illusion. This is an important point. That energy is not an illusion. That energy is a reality. The seed in itself has an energy to produce a great big tree. It has that strength. It has that capability, that capacity. And this is what the word Shakti means. Shakti we translate as energy and power, but it should actually be translated as potential. Because when we use in Sanskrit the root shak, for example, Shaknoti Bhavan, can you come today to the class? Can you? Potential. Is there a possibility? So that potential which is there in consciousness to produce these endless names and forms, these endless forms to manifest through these endless forms. That capacity, that capability, that potential which is there within consciousness to give rise to this multiplicity, that potential is called Prakriti. Consciousness, Brahman, and Prakriti, energy. These two words. Yet, because for our own understanding, for our own description, when we speak of consciousness, we think of something as being conscious, as being aware, and when we speak of energy, we speak of something that is the very source of everything, the creating principle of everything, and because everything is material, unconscious, we think of it as an unconscious energy. And therefore, in our understanding, we create this distinction of unconscious energy versus consciousness. But in the understanding of Yoga and Vedanta, they are just two different faces of the same coin, two different ways of looking at the same entity. From one side, it seems like pure consciousness. From the other side, it seems like pure energy. And of course, the description is different, everything is different, yet in essential nature, they are one and the same thing. And they are just two different faces of the same coin. That is a very important idea, and this is what we find, for example, when we see these beautiful statues of Ardhanarishwara, in which on half side it is Parvati, and on half side it is Shiva. It looks, to a newcomer, it looks a very strange thing. I mean, how can one person be on his half side, his Parvati, and on his half side? But since everything that we have in Hinduism, all these symbols, they represent deep mystical ideas, that is just an artistic presentation of this deep mystical idea. And the idea is that if consciousness is the seed, Prakriti is the capacity, the potential that is within that seed to create this entire, the huge tree. And that potential that is completely inseparable from that seed. It permeates every aspect of that seed. So that is when the word Prakriti is used in Sankhya, in Yoga, then the word, because Prakriti actually just means the source of Vikriti. Vikriti, it is the opposite of Vikriti. Vikriti means effect, and Prakriti means cause. So whatever is understood as the supreme cause, that is what is referred to by the word Prakriti. The supreme cause of material existence, which is pure potential, pure energy, Shakti, pure potential. So the idea here that Sri Krishna is saying is that in our forgetfulness, we as common human beings take birth as subservient to this nature. Yet when an incarnated being such as the Buddha, such as Krishna, Rama, these incarnated beings, when they take birth into this world, they take birth with complete awareness, with full awareness. They completely remain aware of it. This is what Sri Krishna is stating here, that Bhutanam Ishvaro Visan Prakritim Swam Adhishthaya Sambhavami Atma Mayaya. Through my own Maya. Maya is, in the understanding of Vedanta, Maya is the capability of producing multitude out of singularity, out of consciousness which is one, undivided, omnipresent. It is capable of creating this diversity. And therefore, when in the most ancient Vedas, when the word Maya comes, Indro Maya bhi pururupa iyate, consciousness with the help of Maya assumes all these myriad forms, all these many forms. With two mirrors on both sides, one can get an infinite line of reflections of the same one single. If you stand between two mirrors and you look on both sides, you get infinite reflections on both sides. On this side you see an infinite line of Siddhartha, on this side. If you go on the other side, many temples actually have, in between there is a statue, and on both sides there are these two mirrors. And if you look at the reflection, you see an infinite line of reflection on both sides. This is what Maya does to one consciousness. Therefore, when Shankaracharya speaks of Maya, Aghatita Ghatana Patiyasi Maya, that Maya is that capacity to render the impossible actual. That is what Maya stands for. So it is again Prakriti, Maya, they are completely interchangeable synonym words. Sometimes the word Prakriti is used, sometimes the word Maya is used. Both are used here by Sri Krishna, and therefore some masters have suggested that why not look for a different meaning of the word Maya? Why should Krishna use two words in the same shloka which mean the same thing? He's not fond of repeating himself. So some commentators like Vallabhacharya, this great 15th century revolutionary master of the Vaishnava tradition, he suggests that one of the meanings of the word Maya is also compassion. Out of compassion. Atma Mayaya. Out of compassion. Now this is an idea that goes to the very heart of the yogic understanding, or also of the Buddhistic understanding. Why does Buddha take birth on this realm of existence? Out of compassion for those who are suffering, so that he can show them the path, he can guide them to the state in which there is no suffering at all. The same idea exists in relationship to Kapila, whose students had established the city of which the Buddha was a prince, Kapila Vastu. The same idea in the yogic traditions, in the ancient yogic traditions, existed in relationship to Kapila. We actually, because Patanjali's text on yoga is just a new addition created by him, which survived the test of time, but this doesn't mean that it was the first text ever written on yoga. There were many texts written prior to him which did not make it down to us. However, a very ancient master called Panchashikha, who was possibly the grand disciple's disciple of Kapila himself, his 25 sutras have made it. Vyasa, in his commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, quotes 25 sutras, from that ancient text, and that is how they have survived, because we have that commentary. So through that commentary, this Panchashikha Yoga Sutra, the Yoga Sutras by Panchashikha have survived. And in that Yoga Sutra, one sutra says, Adi Vidwan, the first master, by which he refers to sage Kapila, Adi Vidwan, Nirmana Chittam Adhisthaya, again the same root, Adhisthaya, by becoming the master of a chitta, of a mind content that he created for himself. And this idea of Nirmana Chitta has also been mentioned by Patanjali in the 4th chapter, where he speaks of Nirmana Chitta, that out of compassion to come into this world, yogis create a chitta, create a mind, so that they can come into this level of existence and can show the path to enlightenment, show the path to peace, show the path to inner stillness. So, Adi Vidwan Nirmana Chittam Adhisthaya, by becoming the master of a mind which was created by him, Karunyat, out of compassion, Bhagavan Paramarshihi, Lord, the great Rishi, Asuraye Jijyasamanaya Tantram Provacha. He gave these teachings of yoga to his disciple, Asuri, who had this desire to know. So why does it happen? It happens out of karunya. It happens out of compassion. So this idea of compassion and is again also deeply related to the Buddha, to the Buddha's taking birth into this world, and also for the divine being incarnated into this level of existence. So some devotional traditions, this master who translates Maya as compassion, and the meaning exists, because the word Maya has many meanings. It also means wisdom, it also means knowledge, it also means insight, and it also means compassion. One word in Sanskrit can have many meanings. So he draws our attention to that meaning as well. So I think with this shloka is completed. Prakritim swam adhisthaya sambhavami atma mayaya. Out of compassion I take birth. So now, what is the purpose of this birth? This will be the subject of discussion in the next 2 shlokas, that whenever the path of righteousness gets destroyed, which would, because dharma are the principles which keep the society balanced. The moment these principles of righteousness are under threat and unrighteousness becomes stronger and starts destroying the universal balance, that is when such a manifestation takes place. So this is what Sri Krishna will start talking about in the next 2 shlokas. We'll discuss that in our next classes. Any questions or any comments? Yes. How does death figure into? Yeah. How does death figure? Can you make possibly this the question a little bit more specific? When we've
been talking about what inner consciousness and the connection between God Himself. So we're a spark, and that spark goes out. What happens when the spark goes out?
What happens when the spark goes out? What happens when the spark goes out?
come back and never tell us. This is the way.
Maybe Ganga washes the fire to the ocean, extinguishes.
The spark becomes what it was a few moments before it was produced. That is what it becomes.
The connection is always there.
The connection is always there. Ganga, we think, comes out of Gangotri. This is what we think. Ganga actually comes out of the ocean. And the moment it merges back into ocean, it loses its individual identity altogether. There is no Ganga anymore. Ganga ceases to exist. There is no Ganga beyond Ganga Sagar. Yet, does every bit of that Ganga, any single bit of that Ganga actually get destroyed by losing its identity? It was just a cycle. She was in the ocean. The sun was creating an effect on that ocean, pulled out that water from the ocean, brought it up into on top of the Himalayan mountains. A stream started out of it. We thought, okay, we go to Gangotri, where a stream of a river comes out of the glacier, and we meditate on Ganga and say, this is where Ganga is produced. But we are not aware of the entire, what is happening beyond what we are seeing there. The origins lie there. And as she travels through the whole nation and quenches the thirst and makes the life possible of, I think, the seventh or the eighth amongst whole humanity, every seventh or eighth person lives on the banks of Mother Ganga, is somehow related and dependent on this river. After doing that, when she merges back into that ocean, that is her death. For her it is, for her individual identity, it is complete death.
So how does a person, when a person says they've lived many lives, how do they know that?
That is what we discussed in great detail in our previous classes when we analyzed samskaras, when we talked about samskaras, these subtle impressions. The answer comes from analyzing subtle impressions that a person does in meditation, and that is what people like, what psychologists like Weiss have done in many masters, many lives, which became very famous books. We discussed this in great detail when we were trying to analyze how a dream body comes into existence. So that is that would be a very detailed discussion, but it is there. So
you can listen to it
on
our
YouTube.
Facebook, on the previous classes.
In the previous classes, all that discussion is there. Our question answer is there. The idea how Buddha became aware of his past lives and all that we discussed. Tried to make some sense of it at least. That is what we tried to do. It is related to the subtle impressions that are there in the mind, which a person becomes aware of as he digs deeper into his unconscious mind. Yes, this comes through meditation. This is Patanjali, he will say. He says in the 3rd chapter, samskara sakshat karanat, by becoming aware of one's samskaras, purvajati jnanam, a person can experience, can become aware, can know the causes, the certain life circumstances which must have been present to impress that particular samskara into one's mind. That is what he discusses in the 3rd chapter of the Yoga Sutras. But again, as we finally concluded, The whole journey and the whole thirst of a mystic is not in unlocking this cycle of birth and death and understanding it, but it is in understanding that which does not take birth and which does not die. It is in understanding that entity, becoming aware. So from that mystical viewpoint, even the analysis of rebirth, reincarnation, incarnation, all this is meaningless ultimately. If we look at texts like Avadhuta Gita, for example, by this Ashtavakra who was crippled in 8 parts of his body, this great crippled master, one of the greatest mystics, he cuts through all these things and makes us aware always of what, because in these discussions sometimes we get, the Buddha tries that, that's why he does not want us to go too much into, but out of curiosity, is there God? Is there life after death? All these curiosities come up and we start to discuss these things, fine, but one should not lose track of what is the final goal. Okay, so let us leave it here. Still, if there is any question, you can ask me personally. I'm here for a few moments. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः।